I'm Cody Stoots. Welcome into the channel. Let's talk some Texans, getting into the Steelers versus the Texans for Sunday and looking at this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Boy, am I totally, wholly, thoroughly unimpressed. Let's talk about how the Texans can take advantage of this Steelers offense, and if you're caught sleeping, well, the Steelers will get you. Don't let that happen on Sunday. If you're the Houston Texans, how do you avoid it? We'll break it down here on the video. Would love a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out Houston Football, where I do all my writing on the Houston Texans. The link is in the description down below. The offense for any team starts with the quarterback, and the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers is Kenny Pickett, the second-year quarterback out of Pittsburgh, the 20th overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft. And Pickett and the Texans are kind of linked in a sense. One, the Texans could have drafted Kenny Pickett when they needed a quarterback, but they decided to stick with Davis Mills, use their 2 first-round selections on Derek Stingley and Kenyon Green. But they also could have traded with the Pittsburgh Steelers, it feels like, because if you remember after that draft press conference, Nick Caserio mentioned they had an opportunity to trade back to say somewhere like 20. Well, that's where the Steelers ultimately ended up picking Kenny Pickett. So maybe there was a link there, but Pickett's one of the quarterback options the Texans could have gone with instead of C.J. Stroud. So they're linked a little bit in that sense, but no Texans fan, if you've watched any of Kenny Pickett, is hoping or wishing that Kenny Pickett was the quarterback for the Houston Texans. He had a fine college career. It was very nice. He had a lot of success at Pitt. And coming into the NFL, there were certainly going to be some limitations to what Pickett brought to the table. And he showcased that in his time starting for the Steelers last year and the short start to the season this year. Pickett's just not very good. I don't believe he's a very good quarterback. He doesn't see the field well. The offense is built in a weird way. He makes some questionable decisions. He bails on pockets quite a bit. Now, he's got a little mobility to his game where he can escape some pass rush. He can extend a play here or there. But overall, Pickett's a pretty unimpressive quarterback. There's not a lot to his game. He just threw 2 touchdowns in a game for the first time last week against the Raiders. Now, he had a tough start to the season facing the 49ers and the Browns as the first 2 defenses that he faced, but Pickett is not very good at the quarterback spot. The completion percentage is low. As I just mentioned, he doesn't throw a lot of touchdowns. He threw a lot of interceptions to start the season. Again, 2 tough defenses that he went up against in throwing those interceptions. He kept the ball pretty clean the latter part of last year down the stretch, but he started the year just handing the ball away. So he'll definitely throw you one when it comes to Sunday's matchup against the Texans. They got to be ready for that opportunity. Heck, if Trevor Lawrence and Lamar Jackson are going to throw you interceptions, Kenny Pickett certainly is the type of guy that will throw you one on Sunday, and that can help change the tide of the game. When you look at just this year for Pickett, there's a little bit more to the offense. He has hit some big plays. I was very critical of Pickett because his very own tight end came out in the offseason and said they didn't have hot routes last year because Kenny Pickett didn't learn the offense well enough to go in there and hot route some of the wide receivers in the middle of the game. That's improved a little bit. You can see him making some adjustments at the line of scrimmage with this Steelers team and ultimately hitting some big plays. He's got the longest play of the year from a passing standpoint. He hit a big 70-plus yard bomb to George Pickens for a touchdown. Calvin Austin, their other wide receiver, had a big 70-plus yard touchdown last week. But here's what I'm talking about with Kenny Pickett. Here's what I'm thinking about when I think that Kenny Pickett's not very good. You take away those 2 big plays from Kenny Pickett, okay? Those 2 big plays come off the docket like it's gymnastics scoring. They take away your best score and your worst score. Let's take away those 2 best plays, those 2 big plays from Kenny Pickett's season and Kenny Pickett's total this year. His yards per attempt is the worst in football of any regular starting quarterback. It's horrible. He doesn't throw the ball very far. So when you think about what Pickett's going to bring to the table this weekend, start thinking about a lot of what Gardner Minshew brought to the table. Make a quick decision. Throw it into space. Try to get rid of the ball quick. That's another element of this Pittsburgh Steelers team. The Texans have allowed more sacks as a team than Pittsburgh has, but Pittsburgh has let Kenny Pickett get hit more than C.J. Stroud. Pittsburgh has allowed more hurries on Kenny Pickett than the Texans have allowed on C.J. Stroud. Think about that when you start thinking about how good or bad an offensive line has played. If you've played worse than the Texans through 3 weeks, you're a really bad offensive line. So I'm not worried about Kenny Pickett. He doesn't scare me at all. Trevor Lawrence scared me a little bit. Anthony Richardson had some scary aspects to his game, even though I didn't believe that he was a really, really good quarterback. He got knocked out in that game, and certainly Lamar Jackson's scary. This is the first quarterback where I'm not scared at all of the quarterback if I'm the Houston Texans defense. And with Jalen Petrie likely being back on the field, the way that he was able to pick the ball off last year, how aggressive he is, his play recognition, I would think Jalen Petrie to catch an interception is a pretty good bet if you want to make it with your friends or you have your favorite legal sports book to go make that wager. Certainly go about that if you'd like. I believe Jalen Petrie is going to get himself an interception on Sunday. And if it's not him, it could be somebody else. Pickett's going to throw the Texans one, and he's going to try to get it deep every now and then. I don't see it working out. He's going to be the driving force behind this offense not getting going for Pittsburgh on Sunday and having a tough day. Now, the part of the offense that could get going and make it a long day for the Houston Texans is that rushing attack. Najee Harris is fantastic. Najee Harris is a really talented running back. Now, after I've said all that, Najee Harris's results have been putrid this season. It has not looked good for Najee Harris when he's been on the field. And in fact, Jaylen Warren, the backup running back, is a guy that most people in the fantasy football community believe is a better option, but has just played better than Najee Harris to this point. The Steelers seem to trust him, but Harris is a talented guy, and I like the comment from defensive coordinator Matt Burke of the Houston Texans this week. I asked him, hey, when a team's struggling on one side of the ball like the Steelers are, not being able to run the football, what do you make of them? How do you approach them? And he said, look, well, they played two really good defenses, and then they went over 100 yards rushing in the third game when they didn't play a great defense, and they played the Raiders last week and went over 100 yards rushing. It still doesn't look good in the Raiders game when you go back and watch them run the football, but the way Burke described the Steelers' offense and how they're going to approach things is they're going to keep hammering, and the moment that you don't take care of your business, the moment that your linebacker's not in the right spot or your defensive lineman doesn't plug up the correct hole, Pittsburgh breaks a big one. Now, Najee Harris, again, I mentioned he's had some rough stats to start the year, but he's made a couple of big runs, and big plays in the running game can really hurt you. A big play in the running game, 10 yards or more on a rush. Harris has a couple of those. Jaylen Warren's certainly capable of it, and they can throw the ball to both those guys out of the backfield as well. They've thrown the ball to Warren quite a bit to start the season as well. I'm not super worried about the rushing attack, but in a game that could be low scoring because Pittsburgh's bringing a really good defense to town, the Texans defense has favorable matchups, a rushing attack that gets going that maybe bleeds clock off, shortens the game, makes possessions more important. You don't want Pittsburgh to get going on the ground against you. And we've seen through Zach Moss in week 2, Travis Etienne in week 3, this Texans defense has been susceptible to running backs kind of get it going against them. You don't want to have that happen on Sunday. I believe that you could finally start to see some tackles for a loss rack up for the Texans. They've only had one tackle for a loss the past 2 weeks. They've got to get in there, put the Steelers in some second and long, third and long situations, and force Kenny Pickett, who's unimpressive at the quarterback spot, force him to beat you. He can't beat you. Don't let the running backs beat you. Part of that passing attack, let's talk about George Pickens. He drew a DeAndre Hopkins comparison from Texans defensive coordinator Matt Burke, and Pickens has been really, really good to start this season. He's got the most yards per catch of any wide receiver with 10-plus catches on the season. He's dynamic. He can get open. He's tough to cover. And when you think about either Shaq Griffin or Steven Nelson having to defend him, Pickens could have a couple of big game-changing plays for the Texans. He's the dude over there for Pittsburgh. They don't have Deontay Johnson. He's hurt right now. They've got some other guys that they throw the ball to on occasion, but George Pickens is the guy. If he never gets going, the Steelers will never get going, and they'll lose the football game. So you've got to limit Pickens I'm not to say limit him to the fact of, double teaming him, because that's something that the Raiders did last week and it really hurt them. It sort of opened up some things for Kenny Pickett. I don't think it's that much, but if he matches up with Steven Nelson, Nelson will have to continue his impressive cornerback play to start the season to take care of business against George Pickens. That's a guy to watch out for. That's a guy who can have some big plays on Sunday. He worries me a little bit because he and Pickett have connected on some big plays to start this season. Don't let Pickens get going, and you won't let Pittsburgh score the ball or move the ball very easily. Calvin Austin is a player that they used a lot last week. He had that big 70-yard plus play that went for a touchdown. He's a speedy, dynamic guy. You just got to keep the ball out of his hands. The other pass catcher that I'm actually kind of worried about is Pat Freiermuth. Now, we haven't seen the tight ends really affect the Texans like they did in the preseason, but I think back to the preseason when the ghost of Jimmy Graham got the Texans in the preseason game. Durham Smythe, the Miami Dolphins tight end, had some success in the joint practices against the Texans. Freiermuth's a guy that they certainly rely on. He's got a couple of touchdowns on the season. That's a guy that I'd be paying a lot of attention to, especially if he puts some of these linebackers into a coverage situation and you start thinking about, okay, Henry To'oto'o's got to go defend him, or Christian Harris has to go defend him. Freiermuth's a pretty talented guy. He worries me a little bit from a tight end standpoint, just because we haven't seen the tight ends get going against the Texans just yet here in the regular season like they did in the preseason. Ultimately, this Steelers offense is not something to scare you if you're a Texans fan, and it shouldn't scare Bobby Slowick, or it shouldn't scare Matt Burke, DeMeco Ryans, and this defense. The defense of the Steelers should scare C.J. Stroud and Bobby Slowick. That's a conversation for another time. But this offense for Pittsburgh shouldn't scare you at all. Their quarterback is not at the level where he can go out there and dominate you. If the Texans are making some mistakes like they did in week 1 and week 2, shooting themselves in the foot, taking the bazooka to their lower leg, then yes, Pittsburgh's going to hang around. Pittsburgh's going to take care of business. But if the Texans are able to replicate what they did in Jacksonville, which felt like they kind of got going on defense, I would think that the Steelers are going to have a very, very long day on offense. The Texans might even be able to score on defense. I would think that the Steelers are going to have a hard time scoring enough to beat the Houston Texans on Sunday. I'm picking the Texans. Final score prediction, well, that'll be at Houston football before the game gets going. Don't miss that. That's where I do all my writing on the Houston Texans. The link is in the description down below. Something else that is in the description down below is my friends at Underdog Fantasy. I want to tell you a little bit about Underdog Fantasy and what they've been able to put together for my viewers. I told you I was going to tell you about some fun stuff that my friends at Underdog Fantasy have for you, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Plus, we're going to put in our Texans Pick'em entry of the week. Underdog Fantasy is the best way to play fantasy. They've got weekly drafts. They've got drafts that last for the rest of the football season going forward, and they've got the Pick'em format where you put 3 to 5 predictions together in one entry, higher or lower on a predicted stat, and you could 20 times your money in just one entry. That's right. Just one entry will 20 times your money if you get them all correct. Heck, you can even insure your entry to make sure that you're still winning even when you lose. That's how fantastic my friends at Underdog Fantasy are right now. Right now, my viewers are getting a 2-time deposit bonus. That's right. You put in $50, you get 100. You put in $100, you get 200. And the limit used to be 100 for this week only. The limit is $500. So if you want to put in $500, you're going to get a $500 match. Not to mention, you're going to get special Pick'em entry options throughout the duration of your time on Underdog Fantasy. You don't want to miss out on those. Sometimes they're like free squares. It's higher or lower than half a yard for a certain player. Man, doesn't that sound fun? Having a free square in your entry and then 20 times in your money, that would be fantastic. My friends at Underdog Fantasy want you to game responsibly, and they want you to check out the website, which we're going to check out right now here on the channel and put together our Texans Pick'em entry for the week. And you'll see right here, I'm at Underdog Fantasy. I'm on the Pick'em tab. Look at this. The featured 100K Sunday player is Dameon Pierce. Just put this in your entry, and you're entered in for a chance to win $10,000 from Underdog Fantasy, you're going to get a ton of money if you're one of the lucky winners. And here's the best thing about putting this in your entry. You don't even have to win your entry to get entered in. All you have to do is play this in one of your entries, and you'll be entered in for the 100K Sunday. We're not going to use Dameon Pierce because we haven't quite figured out exactly what this Texans rushing attack is. But let's go through some of these Texans predicted stats, figure out where we're going to go higher or lower on some of these, and put together our entry. CJ Stroud. Now, it could be a lot of short fields if the defense is doing their job. The passing yards may not be there, but if the Steelers are playing good defense, if it is a close game, you could see Stroud going over this number. The rushing yards he ran for that big scramble for 11 yards last week, I like to stay away from that. I'm not getting anywhere near the interception. Stroud's taking care of the football. I'm going to hold off on all of my CJ Stroud predictions for right now, and I'm going to work towards some of those wide receivers for the day. I mentioned Dameon Pierce. He had a couple of catches last week. I don't know that I want to do that yet again with Pierce. And again, we can't quite figure out exactly what that rushing attack is, so I'm staying away. Well, that 8.55 fantasy points, that one's tough to go away from. You know what? Let's stick that one in our entry. Let's go higher on that. All we need is a Dameon Pierce basically goal line rushing touchdown, and we get a higher number than that. Let's put that in there. We'll stay away from Devin Singletary. Not quite sure exactly how he's going to get used, so we'll stay away from his predicted stats. Nico Collins, okay. This one feels like a safe bet. Nico Collins, higher on 4 receptions. He only had a few catches last week. I would think they're going to be able to use Nico Collins in a very fun way. Think about the success Brandon Ayuk had against the Steelers team. Nico Collins is the guy that I trust. Robert Woods, he's going higher on those receptions. Let's put Woods in there higher than 3.5 receptions. Tank Dell, 45.5 receiving yards. I'd be shocked if that's not the case. So we've got 4 Texans in our entry. They can't all be from the same team. So let's go find some Steelers here. And I was looking through the Steelers numbers earlier, and I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly what's going on with Kenny Pickett. So I'm not going to select any of his predicted stats in this. I'm not going to go higher or lower on any of these things. The rushing attack is weird. It might get going against the Texans. You certainly hope not, and I don't believe much in them. They use these 2 backs interchangeably, so I don't want to go that route. Pickens on the receptions, that certainly seems like something that he's capable of doing, but I don't want to get caught with Kenny Pickett not being able to get the ball to the guy. So I'm going down here to one of the defenders, one of the studs on the Steelers. Minkah Fitzpatrick, 5.5 tackles and assists. I'm going higher on that as well. So higher for Minkah Fitzpatrick. That puts our entry together. Dameon Pierce higher, 8.55 fantasy points. Higher than 4 receptions for Nico Collins. Higher than 3.5 receptions for Robert Woods. Higher than 45.5 receiving yards for Tank Dell. And higher for 5.5 tackles/assists for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Let's go ahead and put $10 in this one. And let's insure it, just in case Minkah Fitzpatrick doesn't take care of us, or the rushing attack for the Texans gets going and they don't throw as much. So 5 correct pays, we're going to win $100. But 4 correct pays will still get us $25 if our entry wins. You hit submit, you hit confirm, you can share it with all of your friends. It is so easy to do at Underdog Fantasy. Check out my friends at Underdog Fantasy. The link in the description down below will get you signed up. And the promo code is Stoots, STOOTS. That link should autofill, but if not, STOOTS gets you that 2-time deposit, the weekly Pick'em entry bonuses as well. What's the Texans score going to be on Sunday? Well, drop it in the comment section down below. Comment section always active, always interacting with you in the comments down below as well. So don't miss out on that. Don't miss out on Houston football, where I do all my writing about the Houston Texans as well. Appreciate all your support. Appreciate you watching the video today. Would love a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.